Kokiar, the head of the Washington State China Relations Council. It seems like almost every day that the federal government announces new programs with the aim of decoupling with China. Whether the issue is TikTok, Taiwan, Hong Kong, Xinjiang, or Huawei, the current administration certainly appears to be on the warpath with China. Among the presidents on China is a call for US companies with China operations to reshore. However, while this drumbeat of anti-China rhetoric flows unabated, US firms in China continue to invest and grow their businesses. China represents a substantial share of the revenues of companies like GM, Apple, Nike, and many, many others. With China set to become the world's largest economy in the near future, US companies clearly want to remain and grow in the China market. So with all the China bashing going on, how are the China-based subsidiaries of US companies faring? Are they having to walk on eggshells for fear that one tweet might implode their business? How do they plan when the future of the US-China relationship looks so bleak? Are they putting their US employees in China at risk as the political situation between the two countries deteriorates? These are some of the questions that our China-based speaker will address in today's session as we explore the intersection of geopolitics and business in China. Before we get started though, let me introduce the Washington State China Relations Council. Our organization was started in 1979 to help develop and improve relations between Washington and China. We are a membership organization incorporating business, government, cultural, and educational entities, as well as individuals with an interest in China. One of our activities is to produce or co-sponsor webinars on topics of interest to our members. We have a number of webinars scheduled for the next few weeks, which I encourage you to explore by looking at our website, which is very simple, WSCRC.org. Let me briefly mention a few of them to you. On October 1, we're going to have two sessions. In the first one, Spencer Cohen, a well-known economist and China scholar, will talk about various facets of the China Belt and Road program. Later that day, we'll have a book talk with Dory Jones Young, who will introduce us to her book, When the Red Gates Opened, about her time in China in the late 80s, when China was opening up to the outside world. In October, we're going to have a couple sessions, one on the Tech Cold War, and we're going to have a debate about the merits of Confucius Institutes. Again, please follow our website to find out with more details. Since we started the age of Zoom, we have created several partnerships with other China-focused entities in the US. To date, we have co-sponsored events for the US-China series, and we are going to do our first event with the US-China Heartland Association next week. Our Tech Cold War webinar next week will be produced in cooperation with the US-China Business Council, and we now have a marketing arrangement for our webinars with SUP China. I mention these partnerships to you because through these associations, we can bring you access to many China-focused events that are happening around the country. We will hope you find some of these events to be of interest. Now, let me introduce today's speaker. Kedl is a partner in Control Risk Asia Pacific and heads up Control Risk Greater China and North Asia region. He has lived and worked in China since the mid-1980s. Ken consults with multinational and local Asian corporations across all industries on a diverse range of complex risk and strategy issues, from M&A and organic growth strategy to crisis management and operational business controls. Prior to joining Control Risk, Kent was a general manager and co-owner of Technomic Asia, a market strategy and consulting firm. Ken has worked as a journalist and radio broadcaster and is a frequent contributor to Asia-based media outlets and a co-author of a book called The China Ready Company. He has a bachelor's degree in English, which proves to you can do something with a bachelor's degree in English, and a master's degree in East Asian Studies from the University of Minnesota. He's also completed graduate studies in journalism and mass media in the China Times Center for Mass Media and Social Studies. I must admit, I've known Kent for many years and I've heard him talk on many occasions. He always has very interesting stories to tell as his work brings him into, I guess, what I would call very interesting situations, i.e., massive fraud cases, kidnappings, embezzlements, and the like. I'm not sure if we're going to get into any of that today, but I'm sure, anyway, you're going to enjoy the session. I should add that Kent has a second job, kind of his weekend job. He's a stand-up comic, and he's known throughout the English-speaking comedy scene in China and what I understand, just returned from a successful tour of Sichuan. So before I turn it over to Kent, I'd like to remind you to please stay on mute. Please put your questions in the chat box. I'll be monitoring it and Kent will be looking at it. We'll make sure to get your questions up there, and please enjoy the session. So Kent, over to you.
Thanks, Nor. Good evening, good afternoon, everyone. Let me see if I can make this work. Okay. Come on. All right. Does that look okay to everybody?
Yeah, it's not full screen. We still got a little screen on the side.
So Kent,
Yeah.
if you click on display settings on the top, so there is swap. No, go back to your projection mode.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, so.
Okay. Duplicate?
No. Swap presenter view and slideshow.
Oh.
There we go.
Okay, we got it. Yep, that's good.
Okay, cool. All right. You'd think after doing millions of these, I'd be better at this, but turns out no. So thank you, Nor. That was a very, very kind introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. From Shanghai, where it is, doesn't seem as rainy as there in Seattle, but we're heading into the fall season here, which is kind of nice. The things that I'd like to talk about today are some new ideas that I've been kind of kicking around with some colleagues, with some clients, and various other folks who think about China a lot. And so Nora mentioned my nascent comedy career here. It's far short of a career, trust me. But it's in comedy, you do open mic sessions where you try out new material. And typically in a 5-minute open mic session, about 20 seconds of it works and the rest you throw out. So hopefully I'll have more than 20 seconds here, but I'd be interested in your questions and your, kind of having you poke at some of this stuff, because this is still kind of in a new phase. Nora mentioned that I've done graduate work in, actually have a master's degree in Chinese philosophy. And if you think an English degree is worthless, just try getting a degree in Chinese philosophy. There are very few employment trajectories off of that degree. No one is asking for that kind of thing. So I always like to start off with well, and I'm a consultant too, so we always are caveating our work. This is the opening line of the Taoist scripture, the Tao Te Ching, and it says Dao Ke Dao, Fei Chang Dao. And what it means, it was the Tao that is the real Tao is not the eternal or everlasting Tao. And so basically what it says is, if you step up and you try to define truth, the Tao, if you try to define truth, you will miss it, because the truth is by definition undefinable. You can't stick it in a box and put handles on it. And so I'm going to sit here for the next 20, 30 minutes kind of talking about geopolitics and impact on business. I will be 100% right and 100% wrong, I can guarantee you. Again, these are just some ideas that are kicking around, and I'll give some advice at the end about what we see clients doing and the advice that we're giving to clients as well. Reading the news has been really interesting over this past year, actually for the past 3 or 4 years. But we see every day, it seems that we have something new come up. Some of us were chatting just before we started here, and Dory was talking about her time in the 80s, and I was here at the same time too, and many new things were happening. Seems like more new things are happening more often here these days, and so every morning we wake up and there's something new. My premise here is that as business executives, we all read the news, we're all very informed and things like that, but we typically will read the news and then close the newspaper or close our iPads, and then we'll go to work and we'll work on our business operations, and we'll run our companies, and we'll do everything that needs to be done. Whereas the headlines kind of stay back we don't think about them a lot. As Noor said in his introduction, that is not the case now. That we're constantly thinking about these things. We're wondering if the geopolitical mess, if I can say it that way, that we find ourselves in all over the world. It's not just China, US. There's all sorts of things happening. It is having, I would argue, a direct impact on our business operations, and is lurking in the back of our heads on this. So the question is, how do we deal with that? Because as business executives, we're not trained as analysts. We're not trained as, you know, geopolitical experts in that way. We have a lot of experience, many of us, but we're not trained as expert analysts. So how do we combine our day job with what's happening here? Another argument that I'm trying to make is that there used to be this wonderful layer of pink insulation between geopolitics and business operations. Geopolitics and business strategy have always had a connection together, and you know, the executives of big multinationals weigh in on geopolitics all the time. But to have it impact our operations, where we're going to the office and dealing with things that we're dealing with, and to have geopolitics kicking around inside of our head, is a very new thing. And a great example of how the insulation has sustained both business and geopolitical conflict is China and Taiwan. For years, well, ever since '49, China and Taiwan have been butting heads, and it has been a very public argument. There have been you know, verbal bombs lobbed back and forth, and other countries involved, and things like that. And while that chaojia was going on at the surface, underneath, they were each other's biggest trading partners, and business flowed back and forth a lot. But so they were able to sustain this kind of two levels of things. Now, I would argue, there are holes being poked in that insulation. The insulation is still there, but there are holes being poked into it. And the headlines that we saw in the previous slide, that's what we're starting to see right now. And we're starting to see a direct impact of geopolitics on business operations. To think about the Chinese situation and the US-China situation, and I've thought a lot about this. I've been trying to go back and thinking of key moments in recent Chinese history that have kind of made China who it is today. Now, again, this is one of these Dao Ke Dao, Fei Chang Dao kind of things. It's gonna be talking pretty broadly here. So, but I think there are four key moments in recent Chinese history that have brought us to where we are today. 2008 and 2010, of course, was the Beijing Olympics in 2008 and the Shanghai Expo in 2010. And it was kind of China's coming out party, in a sense, coming out and being revealed as a global superpower to the rest of the world. There were a lot of complaints in 2008, I remember, when foreigners had a hard time getting visas and hard time getting tickets and things like that to come. It was very confusing. I don't think the Chinese leadership cared all that much, to be honest. This was for China and for the Chinese people, in a sense. Certainly 2010 and the Shanghai Expo was for the Chinese people to show what the party has done and what the party has brought to the Chinese people. And those of you that attended either or both of those events, they did a fabulous job. It was an amazing kind of coming out party. But again, they were talking to China more than they were talking to the rest of the world. Or they wanted to present to the rest of the world what they were presenting to their own people. So there is this foundation here set of the party reminding the Chinese people what the party has done for China in the past decades. July 2011, this is a kind of an esoteric date, but I remember when it happened thinking that this was a momentous occasion. This was the Wenzhou train accident. If you remember the high-speed train, either to or from Wenzhou, I can't remember, but there was a train accident and the train cars fell off a bridge, a high trestle bridge. I think 30 people were killed, and it was quite an event. Now remember, this is, WeChat. I don't even think WeChat was out at this time. Certainly Weibo was there, and so it was being talked about quite a bit. And if you remember, this is during Hu Jintao and Wen Jiabao. Grandpa Wen was known. Every time there was an issue, or the earthquakes in Sichuan in 2008 and others, Grandpa Wen would come, and he was a very comforting figure. He was a very public figure. They couldn't find Wen Jiabao for days, and it was rumored: is he sick? Where is he? What's happening? And I think the party was just trying to figure out what their response should have been. And finally, Wen Jiabao shows up, and they were literally trying to bury the problem. They were covering the train cars that had fallen with dirt. They had hydraulic excavators out there doing this. And Wen Jiabao, the next picture in the paper and on Weibo, was Wen Jiabao directing, how to uncover these things. And one quote that sticks with me, he said, someone basically asked him, "Why are you here?" And he said, "The netizens have spoken." He said there was such a wave of people wanting to know and communicating on social media that he had to show up. And so this was the first time really where there was a two-way dialogue, I think, between the people and the party. Now, a lot has happened in social media since then. A lot of controls and things have been put in place, but that was the first time I really noticed that the party was trying to listen to the people. Again, there's a lot of details around that, but that was kind of the concern. Everybody thinks, well, the Communist Party here just rules because they rule. They're not encumbered by democracy. They are extremely concerned what people think. And they are, just like in 2008 and 10, preaching to the choir. They want to make sure that they are seen as leading. 2012 and 13, of course, is when Xi Jinping takes over, first as the head of the party in 2012, and then as the head of the government basically in 2013. This was the first time in a long time that you started to hear about the party, and the party being talked about quite a bit. Obviously, the Communist Party has been present in China since 1949 and has been the only really political party out there. But I think Xi Jinping, who is a student of history, kind of looked at the former Soviet Union and really asked a lot. And you heard this in some of his early speeches. He asked a lot about why did the Communist Party fail in the Soviet Union. And the conclusion I think he came to, at least as I read Xi Jinping's speeches, is that the Communist Party in the Soviet Union lost both credibility and its relevance. It was certainly no longer credible. It was a kleptocracy, and people just didn't believe in it anymore. But it also lacked its relevance. It just was no longer relevant to the daily lives of people. And Xi Jinping, I think, again, I don't have access to inside speeches here, but I think the message to his fellow party members was, we need to improve our credibility, and we need to make sure that we are relevant. And on the credibility side, of course, that's when he started the anti-corruption campaign in 2013. A number of you who've been in China or watching China for a number of years, every political transition, new people come in and say, okay, we're gonna clean up shop and things, and the pendulum swings, and then it comes back to the middle and business as usual. Xi Jinping has not done that. The pendulum keeps swinging, and he continues to go after people. Enforcement of regulations, from environment to food safety to anti-competition to now cybersecurity, is the big one. And so there really are, the party is really being relevant to the people. The last one here is, to move the screen here. The last one here is in November of 2017. And again, a bit of an esoteric date, but again, it was a big impact to me. This is a speech that Xi Jinping gave at Davos that year. And if you have some free time, go back and read it. If you can read it in the original Chinese, it's even better, because some of the word choices he makes are quite a bit different. he offered a different model. He stepped up, and it was a really gutsy speech. He stepped up and said, you know, Western liberal democracy has failed you. And of course, we're coming off the global financial crisis and a number of other things. And he said, Western liberal democracy has failed you. If you want to look at a development path, any country out there that wants to develop, wants to grow strong, look at our Chinese model. We have been able to do it. And he talked about the many things that China has been able to do. Deng Xiaoping had a very famous phrase, which I have written there, "Tao Guang Yang Hui," which says to hide your light and bide your time. And Deng Xiaoping was like, don't make a big deal of yourself. Be very quiet, you know, succeed, and they will know you by your successes. And Xi Jinping kind of turned that on its head and started talking a little bit more out there. Now, we've seen a lot more of that happening here during the times of COVID and the Chinese Foreign Service and the wolf warrior kind of attitude that we've seen coming out. But this was the first time that we really see Xi Jinping, you know, kind of presenting on a global stage like that. To be sure, he got quite a few criticisms here in China for that, and there were some political leaders who thought that he should not have been doing that. So we're in a tight situation here right now, and it's not just U.S. China; it's China and Australia, China and Canada. There's been some tensions with Japan and Korea as well. This is one of my favorite photographs of Trump and Xi Jinping together. I apologize for a political opinion, but there is a really creepy look on Trump's face right now, and Xi Jinping is kind of looking out the side of his eyes like, I'm not sure if I can trust you. And so, but this was a time of everybody was trying to be nice to each other, and now the gloves have completely come off. This warning came out in July. It came out again here a number of weeks ago. But these are the types of things that kind of come out that make people incredibly nervous. You know, and so at Control Risks, we are a specialist risk consultancy. And like Nora said, we do a lot of investigations in fraud and corruption and things like that. But we also do a lot of work in crisis management. And we started in the mid-'70s in kidnap for ransom advisory, and we still do a lot of that. But a lot of this really kind of critical problem solving types of things. And we are involved in a lot of regulatory investigations here where the Chinese authorities are investigating our client. And sometimes our clients have been detained or certainly travel restricted. But this word arbitrary has been a sticking point here. We don't believe these are arbitrary. We don't believe any of this is arbitrary here in China. We believe that the Chinese authorities, contrary to what it might look like from the outside, are very strategic about this. And they are, if you look at every arrest that's been made, it's been made not because of the nationality of the individual, but because there has been a compliance problem. They have been an unregistered NGO. They've had fraud and corruption issues. They've kind of broken Chinese law. Now, again, you can say, well, but you know, it's the party that determines the law. The law is not above the party. That's true. But still, there has not been a targeting of individuals because of what country they come from, and we continue to say that, and China will continue, I think, to kind of have that attitude. So the question here is, what do we do in the face of all of this when, okay, it may not be completely arbitrary, these things, but the threat of detention, the threat of being investigated by Chinese authorities, this is scary stuff, and there's a lot of concern that clients have. And now today, I never know what my day is going to be like, what kind of conversations or phone calls I'm going to get from clients until I wake up and read the news. And then I know what kind of phone calls and questions I'm going to be getting that day. That, for someone who's been doing this a long time like I have here, that is a brand new thing. And so we can feel quite powerless as companies, and we say, well, how can I solve the U.S.-China political relationship? I can't. There's nothing I can do about that. But given where China is today, and given those four key moments that I think have kind of created China with a certain personality today, I do think there are some things that companies can and should do. These are highlight kind of four things that companies are doing right now. Then I'll talk about some advice of what we're giving companies now too. Oh, I thought it. So first of all, there is a risk of overreacting, and I think Noor said it in his opening remarks about, you know, what is a tweet going to do. And if you look at the NBA, you know, what happened to them about a year ago, a little over a year ago, with respect to Hong Kong, it was seemingly an innocent thing, or the Houston GM that did it wasn't thinking about it, but there was a strong reaction. And so everything becomes politicized. Non-political things become political. And so right now, companies are being very careful to talk to their people about that there is no such thing as obviously as freedom of speech in the sense that we would understand it in the US here, but it's even more than that. It's the politicizing of things that aren't necessarily political. Now, I think we're starting to see that in the US here, where face masks become a political issue. So we're starting to get a little bit of that ourselves. But particularly for things on social media, companies are cautioning their people to be extremely careful about what they say on social media. There is no such thing as I'm speaking as an individual versus I'm speaking on behalf of the company. For myself, I'm the head of our company here, and everything that I say, from the Chinese perspective, everything that I say reflects back on the company. I have no me in that. Now, again, what Noor was saying and doing comedy and things like that, that can be a very difficult thing. That can be a difficult balance. And actually, before I started actually doing comedy, I talked to a number of my government contacts and my government security contacts and said, what if, you know, what are the risks of me doing something like this? And I continue to talk to them about it. Matter of fact, someone from the state security operation here attended one of my shows, and he didn't tell me what he thought of it, so I'm just going to leave it at that. But there is a politicization of things that are non-political. Number two, it's all about compliance. You don't have a legal problem here in China. You have a political problem. GlaxoSmithKline, you remember that back in 2013 and 14. We worked that case. We were the crisis managers for them and did their internal investigations. It seemed like they had a legal problem. They didn't. They had a political problem. They had a political problem that needed a legal solution. But it was compliance with Chinese law. The challenge here is that Chinese law is incredibly vague. It's not very specific, and it's designed to be that way. The Hong Kong situation here is interesting. The national security law, which it just came out in Hong Kong, is written in a mainland Chinese style. It's not written in a basic law kind of style. It's written in a mainland Chinese style, which means the definition of the infraction of collusion with foreign powers, of terrorism, of secession, are very vague. What's more specific is the punishment, is the fines and the detention time, and what's very specific is the mechanisms of enforcement. These people will be charged with, will be given the responsibility to enforce that. Here is the new office in this building, photographs of it and things like that. So we tend to interpret things backwards. We look at the enforcement and think, well, because we see the structure of enforcement, they obviously want to enforce this very aggressively. We can't make that distinction here. And it's still very much unknown if and how the national security law is going to be used. Certainly has a dampening effect because the people's concerned about how it might be used. But if you look at practically speaking, how it's been rolled out and everything, there is a broad scope for implementation for these laws. That happens in China all the time. Cybersecurity law is a great example of that here. If you interpret it, one interpretation of it is that China wants to cut off from the rest of the world. They only want things to form this China bubble. that you can draw that conclusion. And if you look at some of the actions that they've taken lately, you can draw that even more. However, that's not clear that that's exactly what they're going to do. So the challenge here is really is how to comply with vaguely worded laws. We all say compliance isn't possible here, not because you don't want to, but because you don't know what the definition of compliance is. Regulations here are aspirational. Again, cybersecurity law. We would like a cybersecurity environment that does this, and this. We're not quite sure how we're going to get there, so we build the destination, then we build the road to it, and that is a very common thing to happen in China. Regulatory investigations are a big threat for companies right now, and Xi Jinping, one of the things that he did, like I said before, was to come in and say, listen, we are going to enforce the regulations that are on the books. And Nora's experience here for many years, and particularly in the food business, like he was, there's a lot of regulations around food. They were probably not very aggressively enforced, or kind of spottily enforced over the many years that Nora was here. They have decided to really step up the regulatory side of things, these things here. So when I came into control risks almost 10 years ago, we would get a phone call once a quarter, maybe, that a company was facing a regulatory investigation of some kind. Now I get a phone call at least once a week, sometimes twice a week, from companies that are being faced with a regulatory investigation of some kind. If you are being investigated, it's not about proving your innocence. If you're being investigated, you're guilty. The question is not your guilt or innocence. The question is not negotiating your guilt or innocence. The issue is negotiating the size of the baseball bat they're going to smack you with. And if you can negotiate it down to the size of a chopstick and then tap you on the forehead with it, that's your punishment. Good job, you've done right. But you're not innocent by any means. We had a client that had a dawn raid one morning, and officials came in, and we were helping them deal with that, and then the officials wanted them to come to their office the next day. And so one of the employees called the office just to say, okay, we'll be here at this time. And she asked the regulatory body, she said, should we bring our lawyer? And the regulatory body said, why do you want a lawyer? Are you guilty? And said, well, no, but okay, never mind. We'll leave the lawyer behind. They just had a very confusing conversation about the function of lawyers in China. So companies right now are looking at these regulatory investigations and are thinking, where can I be exposed? What am I possibly being exposed to? And on the final slide next, I'll talk about how they're doing that. The final thing is employee discontent, and this is it's very much in the early stages here, and I want to be careful not to overblow this, but there are, and I've heard comments from friends and Chinese friends and everything, kind of a general nervousness about working for a multinational corporation. And again, it's not fully blown, but these are issues that I think you really have to deal with your employees about what that is, and to let them know that you are thinking about these geopolitical issues, and that you are thinking about managing your own risk as a company, facing some of these geopolitical issues. We try to talk about that a lot here at Control Risks, what we do here, because we do things that are very, very sensitive, and so we try to talk a lot about how we're trying to manage that risk. There can be an us versus them kind of mentality that we need to be very careful of, particularly those in Hong Kong. We have a number of clients who have been struggling with the relationships between their Hong Kong employees and their mainland employees who are working in their Hong Kong operation. And sometimes they have very divergent views on the demonstrations and things like that. How do you keep that relationship going? How do you make it a professional relationship, but then allow people to have their own personal views on things? Not unlike, as I suppose, Democrats and Republicans working together at the same company. Yes, you can agree to disagree, but there are some times when these emotions run quite high. and that's certainly a risk. Wrap up with this, what you should be doing. And these are four things I'm constantly coming back to with clients. First of all, it's all about your company. It's very easy to hear something like, oh, arbitrary detentions are possible. And then everybody runs around with their hair on fire, those who have hair. It's really easy to do that. And I really caution against that. You need to know what your specific risk is for your company. The formula for risk is threat times vulnerability. Okay, threat. There's a car, or there's a bicycle. You know, I'm standing on the sidewalk and there's a bicycle speeding at me on the sidewalk. Happens every day in China. That's a threat. If I'm a small child, I'm more vulnerable to that. I'm a pretty big guy, so I can have a bicycle hit me and I'm not as vulnerable to it. So that bicycle speeding towards me, a tall adult, the risk is lower than it is for a small child standing there. Your company is the same. You may have similar threats out there, but because of who you are and what sector you're in, what you're trying to do, and who you work with, who your stakeholders are, and what your value chain is like here, you will have different vulnerabilities to that. You need to understand your specific risk for your company. And anyone that has a risk register that is older than about 18 months, you're probably out of date in China right now. This has to be, we do risk registers every year, right? I mean, you know, the company has us do that, and it's more for governance. The board wants us to do that to kind of cover our ass on things. You need to have, this needs to be a living document for you, because things are changing so fast and so frequently. Because if you have an accurate risk register, you won't manage risk by reading the headlines. And I'm when my clients call me because they just read a headline and they wonder how it impacts them, to me, that means that they don't have a good understanding of their own risks, and they haven't really thought through them, because they should be able to process those things, okay? The headlines do not inform your risk. The headlines, so when we talk about kind of risk management, you have a basic risk, and then there are various scenarios here. Now, if everything goes on, here's the most likely scenario. Now, if things get really crazy, here's a crazy scenario, and here's a way the heck out there scenario, okay? And then we say, these are the triggers on the way to those scenarios, okay? This has to happen, and this has to happen, and this has to happen for this scenario to come true. Headlines inform your triggers. They don't inform your risks, they inform your triggers. And unless you have a good set of scenario risks, your scenarios, and then your triggers, you're just going to get, you know, spun around the axle every time a new headline comes out. And you don't need to do that. Companies need to be monitoring things right now. They need to be keeping an eye on what's happening out there, so they can constantly be updating their view of these risks. Government affairs has always been a big deal here in China, but government affairs historically has been about market access for most multinational companies here. We needed someone to, you know, kind of help schmooze with government to get our licenses, get our approvals, get our taxes done, all sorts of things. We still need that in China, but because of the more proactive stance of the government right now, particularly from the regulators, we need to have government affairs for the purpose of risk management. We need to know the regulatory enforcer side of things. In China, very often on the government side, there are the policy people, and then there are the enforcers. Okay, I'll go back to cybersecurity again. Cybersecurity, the policy is done by the Cyber Authority of China, the CAC, but the enforcement is mostly done by the Public Security Bureau, the police. And so they're two very different entities, and they very often don't talk to each other. And they're allowed to kind of interpret things as they want to. You need to understand both sides of it. You also need to own it yourself. You know, lobbyists and, you know, government affairs people that, you know, that I can do your government affairs for you. That happens all over the place. I don't believe in that. I just don't believe in that. When we work with the government affairs teams, we help them understand who they need to talk to. We help them, this is the message you need to do, but you need to go talk to them yourself. You need to own this. You can't have a partner do it. You can't have someone else do it. A client of mine that we were helping do this, he had a very earthy metaphor. He said, you're right, we need to own this. He said, you don't outsource your wedding night. There are certain things that are really important that you need to handle yourself, and government affairs is one of them. I'll leave you with this one question that you should be asking yourselves about your own business. What do we want the government and the party to think about us in the next 5 years? This is a very new question. Even 5 years ago, I wouldn't have said that you needed to answer this question. This is absolutely critical. There's all sorts of policies out there right now to encourage Chinese businesses, and you look at the Made in China 2025, you look at all the money that's flowing into that. And you read a lot of headlines that say, oh, foreign companies are not welcome here anymore. And some surveys come out where foreign companies feel that they're not very welcome here anymore. I would disagree. I think foreign companies are very welcome here, but not the way we used to be. We would just show up with technology and money and the door was open to us. Now we need to actually prove our value. But we need to prove it on the political side as well, on the government and party side. So you need to ask yourself, well, actually need to answer the question, what will the government think about us? And then what do we want the government to think about us in 5 years? Because that will tell you what your strategy needs to be between now and then. So I'll leave it there. If anybody has any further questions, feel free to reach out on email. I think we are recording the session, so it'll be available, and happy to share the slides as well. Nora, back to you.
Great, yeah, thanks you, Kent. That was really illuminating, and I think particularly for someone like me who spent time in China, it's interesting to see how things are transitioning as life in China changes. So I'm sure we'll have lots of questions. I got a couple written down here, but the first one I think that came to my mind, and then I see that Dory put it up, is you talk about arbitrary arrests, and you said they're not really arbitrary. There's an issue behind them, usually with your company. But then we have the issue of the two Michaels from Canada, and so how do you explain that? Because everything we read says that's mostly politics.
Well, there is very much a political element, and the fact that they are Canadian, I think, has an impact there. You have to remember, though, that at that time there was a huge push on enforcing the NGO law here. The NGO law had just kind of come out, again, incredibly vague, hard to decide what it is. But one of the things that it was very clear on is that NGOs, in order to operate as an NGO in China, you needed to register. You had to be a registered NGO. Of course, the process to register was unclear. I'm on the board of a couple of NGOs here in China, and we really struggled with that. But we took it incredibly seriously, and one of them, we pulled out of China. We kind of enabled a Chinese organization to take over, and are working very closely with them, but we have no ownership like that. What basically the two Michaels are being accused of is that operating as an unregistered NGO in China. Now there's state secrets and all sorts of things involved in that as well. The fact that they are Canadian is convenient. At the time, I think was convenient for the authorities, but I know of a number of other heads of NGOs who were arrested as well, who are still in jail, that never made the news, and they're not Canadians. So there was a combination of the convenience of timing of that to have that happen. From a hostage standpoint, the Canada detaining the CFO of Huawei and the daughter of the founder, taking the two Michaels, it was not a proportionate response. If you look at that, you'd have to go after the CFO of Bombardier or something as they come through. If you want a proportionate response, that would be it. So I want to be very careful because there's a heck of a lot of politics involved in it, but it was a compliance issue. I mean, the fact remains is that there were NGOs operating in China without an NGO license, which used to be fine before. No one cared. Now they care. So compliance becomes a huge issue.
Yeah, and just from experience, I ran a big NGO in China, and we struggled for a couple of years. Just recently, basically, it's no longer a foreign NGO; it's a Chinese NGO, and we basically took over a Chinese NGO, and that's how the problem was solved.
Yeah, exactly.
It was difficult. Okay, let's see. We got any other questions here? Okay, don't see other questions in the chat box. You just mentioned it in your closing comments there is I actually read things that says the Chinese, maybe the local government authorities and stuff are actually out encouraging foreign companies and actually giving them maybe preferential treatment on certain things. So.
Absolutely, and again, that's why that final question, I can't emphasize how important that final question really is, because, and by government and party, it's at various levels here. You know, China is a three-dimensional chess game in government affairs, and you have to get checkmate horizontally and vertically as well. And so we did a program for a client once where they're a manufacturer of kind of really unsexy technology. It's like valves and pumps and generators and things like that. This stuff's 40-year-old technology. It's nothing new, but they're very good, a European company and very strong. They had a suspicion that some of their competition was getting funding from the Made in China 2025 initiative, which is supposed to identify the kind of 10 key high-tech sectors, you know, AI and semiconductor and med tech and things like that. And it turns out that so we did a study for them to find out, you know, what was happening out there. And it turns out in some of the provinces they were working in, they really weren't welcome at all, because there were local champions that the local government was trying to encourage, and we're dumping a whole bunch of money in and actually even giving preferential procurement to some of those companies. There are other provinces that didn't have the same thing, and they're like, yeah, come in, here's some money. And so China was not, I mean, China's never a monolith like that. There's always multiple countries within one country. So it's really critical to understand what the attitude of the government is towards you in a certain area. And then how can you improve that? How can you build on those types of things? So yeah, in many ways, they're very helpful. We saw local governments here being incredibly helpful at times to companies to recover from COVID. Remember, I mean, COVID, the impact of COVID was not that one supplier went down. The impact of COVID was your whole supply chain went pear-shaped, and you know, and all at the same time, pretty much. The problem with supply chain going down at the same time, it needs to stand up at the same time. And that's been the difficulty of us globally here. So the Chinese authorities were very helpful in investing in doing that and helping companies get back up and running. So yeah, we are seeing a very positive point of view. Our government affairs, you know, big part of my job is kind of managing that for our own company. Our government affairs has improved quite a bit over the last year, just as we've reached out more, engaged more. We've had more of a outreach from the government towards us even. They want to know our view on how foreign companies are looking at things. And we can kind of be a conduit back to them as well. So we've seen it being very positive. It's a heck of a lot of work, and it feels distracting at times, but it's critical to do.
Well, I have to remind you and our viewers that a little bit of lobbying in the U.S. can go a long, long way for a company. So it's similar in China. It's different,
Absolutely.
but yeah, very similar.
Yeah, people are, that's important too.
Yeah. So John, do you want to flip on and go off mute and ask your question? We have John Boleyn here from the Almond Roca candy outfit.
Oh, love you guys.
Thank you. Hey, Kent, I'd love to hear your thoughts on how these geopolitical tensions are affecting Chinese consumers as they look at consumer goods from MNCs and US companies. Obviously, we have an interest. I've heard some crazy stories regarding Australia and, you know, Weibo storms that are hitting companies.
Yeah, it's a great question, John. And a lot of the work that we've been doing lately is for food companies here because it's a critical thing. It's interesting. And it's kind of the perfect storm of concerns for the government here right now, and particularly following COVID, following the Asian swine flu issues and all these things. Food security and food safety is a key concern of the government, the party has put themselves out front to basically tell the people, we are here to take care of you and to make sure that you have lives that are safe. So they've really exposed themselves on that. And so they're very serious about that. So we see a lot of foreign companies, foreign food companies participating in that and being very encouraged to do that from a food safety, transportation, delivery, logistics, all sorts of things. It's been a very positive thing from the government side. When you get down to the brand level, that's a bit of an issue. And so when we do the scenario planning with these food companies, you know, one scenario is consumers turn against this company because it's from a certain country. But there's a number of things that have to happen before that. You don't just wake up one morning and suddenly people are throwing bricks through the windows of Starbucks. You know, things have to happen. And on social media, you see things kind of go up and down. And so monitoring social media is a bit difficult. And you'll see things spin up and then they'll go flat. The NBA situation was really interesting. For about 3 or 4 days, Weibo was just crazy. It was just, you know, things back and forth. And then the government really put the lid on it and really controlled things down at that point. So it's important to again, think of the triggers in the scenarios that reflect your risks, is to monitor what social media is against those triggers. If you see other candy companies get involved, if you see, you know, other brands, other American brands or whatever, you know, kind of get hit that are more of the luxury goods kinds of things, that may inform some of the triggers for you at that point. But so far we've seen spikes here and there, but you know, McDonald's is still really strong here. I mean, COVID had an impact on them. Coca-Cola has had the year of their life here. So far, you know, a lot of those brands have been, I wouldn't say bulletproof, but protected so far.
So yeah, thanks, Kent. We've got a kind of similar question, or it's on the same vein. It's how do you see U.S. companies balancing aligning government priorities while at the same time not triggering the ire of the U.S. government or the U.S. You know, and this is Jacob just came on. It's Jacob's question, who's in Beijing, I believe.
Yeah, Kent. Yeah, let me introduce myself first, Kent. Yeah, I appreciate it. I'm based in Beijing here, from the Pacific Northwest originally. Grew up in Port Angeles, Washington, but been here about 20 years. So I work at a small boutique strategic advisory that works with U.S. multinationals, including some of the ones you mentioned, Coca-Cola, Boeing. So we work across industry. But one thing we've been noticing is, and I really appreciated that last question, I think it's a really important one. These companies need to look out further and say to themselves, what is it that we want the Chinese government to think of us? At the same time, what we're hearing even more right now is concern about their actions in China because of what that will trigger on the US side. That's the biggest concern, I think, now. So just wondering your thoughts on a risk standpoint. How do you see companies, and how are you advising your companies to deal with that?
Yeah, it's a great question, Jacob, and it's a very new one. I mean, you're not quite sure what, you know, free executive order with each tweet every morning. You know, you're not quite sure what's going to happen, and if you're a food company versus a tech company versus, you know, something else, it's very, very different as well. I'm giving a very similar talk to a tech and software organization here in a couple of weeks. And of course, you know, TikTok and WeChat and the whole Huawei thing. I mean, it's just an absolute mess right now. And I think so. More and more of these companies, particularly, we do a lot of work in tech as well. And for more of these companies, your China risks have nothing to do directly with China. Sometimes it is the U.S. or it's. I mean, Australia has been a great example. I've been talking to more Australian companies here this last 3 weeks than ever. And it's so how do you understand what's happening on that side? If you have someone like President Trump whose style is not, doesn't seem to be that there's a method to his madness. Maybe there is, but seems to be, you know, kind of off the cuff types of things. Then that's what you have to deal with, and you have to have that, and you have to have monitoring. But then you say, okay, what if all these and all the big brands do right now, and they did right after President Trump was elected, said, what if, our name comes up in a tweet? What do we do? How do we respond to that? And that's one of the scenarios that they have to run. So a lot of the China risks have kind of non-China origins these days. And the China-based team needs to be working with their headquarters team to think about that, because we tend to be a little bit in a bubble here, and maybe Jacob, you have the same kind of thing. I read the news outside, but I live this reality all the time. Well, in the U.S., they have the U.S. bubble as well, and things look very different from that side. We need to be able to have a corporate approach to this, where we're working together to do it, because I do think there's probably even more risk right now on the U.S. side than there is on the direct China side.
All right. So thanks, Kent. Kevin Kwong, if you want to ask your question, do you want to unmute yourself?
Yeah, thank you for that. I'm just curious because I'm from Hong Kong just a little bit, and I've been in the Seattle for quite a bit. And when I see the media in the US and in Hong Kong and in China, it's all over the place. My question is, how transparent is the Chinese media, do you think? And based on, yeah, I think that's it.
Well, I think the short answer is not at all. I mean, it's state run and state controlled. And so, but that in and of itself is really interesting. And back to John's question about the brands and everything. That's why social media is so fascinating to follow here. Is you see, by what you see happening, by what you see go viral, you see what the government's attitude very often is to it as well. And you can interpret various government attitudes by what they allow to come through. Again, right now on the China side, and maybe it shows a little bit of bias here, but I think the Chinese side has been incredibly reasonable and very measured in their response to a lot of the really aggressive words that are coming out of particularly the U.S., Australia too, to a certain extent. There are the Zhanlang, the wolf warrior attitudes here that pop up, but for the most part, they have been quite measured because they know they don't want to explode relationships like that. And so I think that they're going to continue being that way. They know that it does them no good to follow everybody down the drain pipe. And kind of a race to the bottom in terms of the war of words, but they're going to control the message very, very well. So I when I read the news and social media here, I look for what is allowed to get through or what's encouraged to get through, and the tone that it's set in, and the words. My Chinese reading Chinese isn't good enough to identify specific words here and there, but and some of my colleagues very much can do that. But that's to me is the interesting part, is to kind of learning how to read the news all over again.
So Kent, I think we're coming up on the hour, and I know you got a busy day, but if there's anybody else got another question, please put it up. I'm going to ask one simple one. And that is, back when I first moved to Asia, I was in Korea, and companies there actually left a few mistakes on their tax returns so that they could be caught, and they would say, "Oh, sorry, we apologize, we made a mistake. What's the fine?" Hoping it would be very small. And you said in China, you're basically guilty if they come to investigate you. So the issue is, do companies leave themselves open to minor infractions so that they can kind of negotiate their way out of it and be done with it?
I haven't heard of anybody doing that, and I probably wouldn't advise that here, because the definition of minor and major is really up to the authorities themselves. The legal environment is not tight enough to do that. I think a quick example with a client in the food sector, and this was actually before we were called in to help them with something else, but they got to know the local regulator, the food safety regulator in their area at the FDA, and he was the cousin of a friend or something like that. And the GM at that factory, this is out in Western China, the GM was really smart, foreigner, really smart. She invited this guy to come and tour the factory, tour the production site, and just say, hey, take a look at this. What do you think of this? You know, we want to show you what we're doing, what we're doing on food safety and things like that. And the regulator came and just walked around, gave some advice and things like that. So they kind of built a relationship with the regulatory enforcer. A couple months later, there was an internal whistleblower, an employee who was very angry at the company, who blew the whistle to this regulator to say that the company is mislabeling things and doing all sorts of nasty things. The regulator shows up and says, here, I have this, I have to follow up on it. It's my job to follow up on whistleblowers. They say you have problems in here, here, and here. I want you to go look at it and then come back and report to me. And the company did, and it turns out, yeah, they did have a problem with one labeling, not certainly to the extent the whistleblower said. And so they did, they worked it out, 10,000 RMB fine, boom, Bob's your uncle, they're done. Then the whistleblower was not satisfied, and 3 months later, he blew the whistle again with his regulator. And the regulator came back to our client and said, listen, I know this is BS. He said, you don't have a food safety issue. He says, you have an HR issue. Go fix your HR issue. But because of their relationship with that regulator, they were able to have a reasonable way. No one was not doing they were all doing their job, but they were doing it reasonably. And they were doing it based on the fact that everybody was sincere in what they were trying to do. The company was sincerely trying to practice good food safety. The regulator was sincerely trying to enforce the regulations. And they came together as people, not as combatants like that. So that is very possible. And every outreach that we've seen our clients make to local governments has been very positive. It really has. They really do, I think, want to know how to do their jobs, and they're feeling pressure to regulate, and they know that it's vague as well. Yes, you get the losers here and there, but you find that all over the world. It's not a China issue.
Yep.
So we've seen a very positive outreach.
Right. Yeah, no, I was struck when I was in China, my government affairs people, we had, in every plant, we had to have a government affairs person that got to know the local regulators, the local,
Yeah.
mayors and all that kind of stuff. Whereas in the US, I think generally you run your business and you might come across the local government officials, but you don't cultivate them. But in China, you certainly had to.
Well, and particularly if you're in the food sector, if you're in healthcare, if you're in anything consumer products related right now, on the food and consumer, you got food safety issues. If you're then you have cybersecurity issues, data security issues. You've got information on consumers, information on the market. They are very exposed at this point right now because the authorities are really cracking down on that.
Right. Okay. Well, I think it's about 6:05. Time for you to get to work. Thanks again for spending your time with us. We have quite a few number of people that have sent in notes and said, hey, this was great. I really enjoyed it. Quite valuable. So we really, really appreciate it. And we'd love to have you back. You could do some of your stand-up comedy, or I always love your stories about kind of the underbelly of what's going on, with the fraud, embezzlement, or whatever.
We can have story hour. Yeah, we can do that.
Yeah, there's always good stuff that you've got. So appreciate it very much. And to those of you that are still on the call, please do look at our website because we have a few more interesting programs coming up. And we'd love to have you with us. Okay. Thanks very much.
Thanks, guys.
Okay. Bye, Kent.
Yeah.